My dear child, there is a reason you were guided to hear these words today. Because a conversation that was never meant to reach your ears has already begun. And before this message ends, you will understand why one single answer has the power to change everything you thought you knew about your connection. Someone looked directly into your soulmate's eyes and asked a question so simple that nobody expected it to uncover years of hidden emotions. But when your name silently became the truth inside their heart, the entire atmosphere changed in a way no one could explain. Stay with this message until the very end. Because the final pieces of this story reveal why destiny never truly forgot you. Listen carefully. The moment did not begin with tears or dramatic words. It began with silence. The kind of silence that fills a room when everyone believes they already know what the answer will be. Your soulmate had been sitting among people who had spent months trying to convince them that life must move forward, that the past should remain in the past, and that love sometimes has to be sacrificed for peace. They listened to every opinion without arguing. They nodded politely. They smiled when they had to. Yet inside their heart, another conversation had been taking place every single day, one that nobody else could hear. They had learned to hide your memory so well that even the closest members of the family believed you had become nothing more than a distant chapter. That was the greatest misunderstanding of all, because hidden love often grows stronger in silence than spoken love ever could. Don't skip. As the evening continued, relatives began discussing future plans. Some talked about new opportunities. Others mentioned marriage, stability, family expectations, and the importance of making practical decisions. Every sentence seemed perfectly reasonable. Every suggestion sounded responsible. Yet every word pushed your soulmate further into a quiet battle that nobody around them could recognize. They were not fighting against another person. They were fighting against the fear that choosing their own heart would disappoint everyone they loved. Sometimes the hardest battle is not between two people. Sometimes it is between love and obligation, between what the heart remembers and what the world demands. Then someone who had remained silent for most of the evening suddenly leaned forward with a calm expression. There was no anger in their voice. No judgment. Just one unexpected question that instantly captured everyone's attention. They looked directly at your soulmate and asked, if tomorrow morning you woke up and discovered life had given you one last chance to marry the person your heart has never truly released, who would you choose? At first, several people laughed because they assumed the question was only hypothetical. Others smiled awkwardly, expecting your soulmate to give a polite answer that would satisfy everyone. But instead of speaking immediately, they lowered their eyes. Seconds passed. Then another. The silence became heavier than anyone anticipated. Don't skip. Your soulmate's mind traveled through memories they had spent years trying to organize. They remembered conversations that ended too soon. They remembered promises that circumstances interrupted before they could become reality. They remembered the countless moments when they almost reached out, almost sent a message, almost spoke your name, but convinced themselves that perhaps destiny had already chosen another path. Yet every attempt to move on left behind the same unanswered feeling. Why did your memory refuse to disappear? Why did every important decision somehow lead back to thoughts of you? These questions had never been answered because nobody had ever dared ask the one question that mattered most, until now. Across the room, family members exchanged curious glances. They expected hesitation. They expected uncertainty. What they did not expect was the emotion slowly appearing across your soulmate's face. Their expression changed in a way words cannot easily describe. It was the face of someone realizing they had spent too much time pretending to be undecided when, deep inside, the answer had remained the same from the very beginning. One person quietly whispered that perhaps the question should be ignored. Another suggested changing the subject. But the silence itself had already become an answer, and everyone could feel it. Don't skip. Finally, your soulmate lifted their head. Their voice was calm, steady, and far stronger than anyone expected. They said that if life truly offered one final chance, just one, they would not waste it trying to satisfy expectations that never belonged to their heart. They would choose the person whose absence had taught them the true meaning of love. They would choose the one whose memory never disappeared, even during the busiest days. They would choose the one whose name still brought peace instead of regret. The room immediately became silent again because everyone understood they were no longer speaking about imagination. They were speaking about reality hidden beneath years of restraint. No name had been spoken aloud yet, but several people already understood exactly who lived inside that answer. Faces around the room began changing one by one. Some looked surprised. Others looked uncomfortable. One person quietly looked away as though they had suddenly realized that every plan made over the past months had ignored the only truth that actually mattered. And somewhere deep inside your soulmate's heart, a weight they had carried for far too long began to lift, because for the first time in a very long time, they had stopped protecting everyone else's expectations and had started protecting the truth within themselves. Don't skip. One family member slowly sat down, looking more unsettled than anyone else. They remembered several strange incidents that had seemed insignificant at the time, messages that mysteriously went unanswered, invitations that somehow never arrived, conversations interrupted before they could begin, unexpected advice urging your soulmate to move on without ever understanding what had truly happened. Piece by piece, scattered memories began fitting together like parts of a puzzle that had remained incomplete for years. Nobody could yet identify every missing piece, but the picture becoming visible was impossible to ignore. Someone had quietly influenced decisions from behind the scenes, convincing everyone that separation was inevitable while carefully making sure the truth remained hidden. The realization left several people speechless because it forced them to confront a painful possibility. Perhaps the greatest obstacle had never been distance, misunderstanding, or time. Perhaps it had been silence created by someone else's interference. Don't skip. Your soulmate stood and slowly walked toward the nearby window, looking out into the darkness as memories continued flooding back. They remembered countless nights wondering whether you had chosen another path willingly or whether circumstances beyond either of your control had rewritten the story. They remembered almost giving up completely before an unexplained feeling always convinced them to wait just a little longer. At the time, that feeling had made no logical sense. Now it suddenly did. Deep inside, they had never truly believed the story they had been told. Their heart had quietly resisted every explanation because somewhere beneath the confusion, it still recognized the truth. Turning back toward the family, your soulmate spoke with a calm confidence no one had seen before. They explained that love built on honesty deserves the chance to defend itself before the world decides its fate. Too many conclusions had been accepted without questions. Too many assumptions had replaced conversations that should have happened years earlier. Don't skip. The atmosphere shifted once again when another relative quietly admitted something they had never had the courage to say aloud. They confessed that long ago they had overheard a private discussion suggesting someone believed keeping you apart would make life simpler for everyone involved. At the time, they dismissed it as frustration spoken in the heat of the moment. Now those forgotten words carried an entirely different meaning. Faces around the room reflected shock, regret, and growing determination. For the first time, people were no longer asking whether your connection had been real. They were asking how many opportunities had been lost because the truth had remained buried beneath fear, pride, and misunderstanding. Then, just as the conversation seemed impossible to become any more unexpected, the front door slowly opened. Everyone instinctively turned toward the entrance. A familiar figure stepped inside carrying a sealed envelope that appeared old enough to have been waiting for years. Without saying a single unnecessary word, they placed it gently on the table in front of your soulmate and quietly said, "This was supposed to be opened a long time ago. But today is finally the right day." Every heartbeat in the room seemed to stop at once, because somehow everyone knew that whatever was inside that envelope would reveal the one truth nobody had been prepared to face. No one reached for the envelope immediately. It rested quietly on the table, yet somehow it carried more weight than anything else in the room. Your soulmate stared at it without blinking, almost afraid that opening it would finally answer questions they had carried for years. Every person present seemed to understand that once the seal was broken, there would be no returning to the comfortable stories everyone had been telling themselves. The silence stretched so long that even the ticking of the clock sounded unusually loud. Finally, with slow and careful hands, your soulmate lifted the envelope. The paper had faded with age, the edges slightly worn, proving it had not been written recently. Whatever waited inside had survived years of waiting for the right moment to be seen. Don't skip. As the envelope opened, several folded pages slipped into your soulmate's hands. Before reading them aloud, they paused for a deep breath, as though preparing themselves for something their heart had always hoped was true. The first lines immediately caught everyone's attention. The letter explained that circumstances had separated two people who never truly stopped caring for one another. It spoke about fear, misunderstandings, and decisions made too quickly by people who believed they were protecting everyone involved. But the sentence that froze the room came next. It revealed that more than one opportunity had existed for you and your soulmate to reconnect, yet every single opportunity had quietly disappeared before either of you ever knew it existed. Those words hit the room like a wave. Faces filled with disbelief as people looked at one another, wondering how many chances had been lost without anyone realizing it. Don't skip. Your soulmate continued reading, their voice becoming steadier with every sentence. The letter described moments that perfectly matched memories they had never been able to explain. A meeting that was unexpectedly cancelled. A message that never arrived. A conversation that ended before the truth could be spoken. Suddenly, isolated events that once seemed like unfortunate coincidences began forming one continuous story. Nothing had been as random as everyone believed. Someone had quietly influenced events again and again, believing that if enough time passed, your connection would simply fade away. Instead, the opposite had happened. The distance had strengthened the importance of what both hearts carried, even if neither of you fully understood why. Don't skip. One older relative lowered their head with visible regret. They admitted they now remembered being encouraged years earlier not to interfere, because they had been told everything had already been settled. At the time, they trusted those words without asking questions. Looking back now, they realized how easily good people can accept incomplete information when it comes from someone they believe. That realization spread throughout the room. Nobody was eager to place blame anymore. Instead, they were beginning to understand how silence, assumptions, and fear had slowly built walls that should never have existed. Your soulmate quietly folded the letter for a moment and looked around the room. Their eyes held sadness, but there was something else growing stronger beneath it: clarity. After years of uncertainty, they finally understood that what had happened between you was never simply a matter of fate slipping away. Don't skip. Then another folded page fell from inside the envelope. It was much shorter than the others, almost like a final note added at the last moment. Your soulmate carefully unfolded it and read the words silently before emotion once again filled their face. Someone asked what it said, but for several seconds they could not answer. When they finally spoke, their voice was barely above a whisper. The note explained that if the truth was ever discovered, no one should waste another day living according to misunderstandings created by the past. It urged whoever read it to stop allowing fear to make future decisions. The room became perfectly still because everyone sensed those words had arrived exactly when they were needed most. Don't skip. Your soulmate slowly looked toward the people who had once encouraged another marriage, another beginning, another future without you. There was no anger in their expression. No desire for revenge. Only quiet certainty. They admitted that for years they had searched for closure, believing they needed to forget in order to move forward. But after everything revealed that night, they no longer wanted closure built upon a misunderstanding. They wanted truth, no matter where it led. Several family members nodded silently, realizing they had spent too much time protecting appearances instead of protecting honesty. The atmosphere had completely changed. Plans that once seemed certain suddenly felt uncertain, while the possibility everyone had dismissed for years no longer felt impossible. Don't skip. Just when everyone believed the revelations were finally over, the person who had delivered the envelope quietly spoke again. They explained that the letter was only one part of what had been kept hidden. There was another item, stored safely somewhere else, because its contents were considered too important to trust with ordinary mail. Every face turned toward them at once. Your soulmate asked what it was, but instead of answering immediately, the visitor reached into their bag and slowly placed a small sealed flash drive onto the table. Looking directly into your soulmate's eyes, they said, "The voice recorded inside this was never meant to disappear. And once you hear it, you'll understand why the answer you gave tonight was destined to change everything." The small flash drive remained untouched in the center of the table, yet everyone seemed to feel its presence more strongly than anything else in the room. No one rushed to connect it. No one spoke. After everything that had already been revealed, people had begun to understand that every hidden piece of this story carried the power to rewrite years of misunderstanding. Your soulmate slowly reached toward the device, hesitated for a brief moment, and then picked it up with careful hands. They quietly asked where it had come from. The visitor explained that it had been protected for years because the person who created it believed the truth would one day need its own voice. They had hoped it would never become necessary, but as time passed and confusion continued to grow, they realized that silence was allowing false stories to become accepted as reality. That was why the recording had been preserved. Don't skip. A laptop was placed on the table. Every heartbeat in the room seemed louder as the flash drive was connected. For several long seconds, nothing happened except the soft sound of files loading onto the screen. Then one audio file appeared. There was no dramatic title. Just a simple date from years earlier. Your soulmate stared at it with trembling hands before finally pressing play. At first there was only background noise, followed by several seconds of silence. Then a familiar voice slowly filled the room. The moment everyone heard it, expressions immediately changed. Some recognized the voice instantly. Others looked confused. But your soulmate froze completely, because they never expected to hear those words again. The recording spoke about unfinished promises, about waiting longer than anyone realized, and about refusing to replace genuine love simply because life had become difficult. Every sentence felt painfully honest. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even breathed loudly. The room had become completely captive to a truth that had survived quietly through the years.